we're going to walk through this kind of together because I've done all the prep work, lay everything out, but I want you to see kind of what I'm looking at when I think about, okay, like what's my base case here? Where are we at? Because the big thing I'm looking at is the RSI in Ethereum, which has just hit a historic 85 on the daily level, which has marked pullbacks every single time that it is hit. We're going to get to that screen shortly. But I'm starting here with the ETH BTC chart because I think this is where I'm going to give context from a time frame first and foremost. So now, to preface what I'm about to say, I do think, and I will admit that there's a little bit of bias in what I'm about to show you, because my belief, as I'll also show you here in a second, has long been that we are in that kind of extended fifth wave that I've posted numerous charts on, that we're in like a 3 of 3 of 5. Well, now I think we're in the 4 of 3 of 5. And so basically that I think the fourth wave, the fourth subwave that we're about to wrap up here, is going to lead into the fifth of the third of the fifth wave, if you guys are still with me here, which takes us somewhere between 130 and 145. And then we enter a major larger fourth wave correction before the final fifth blow off top. And if that is true, then that's precisely what happened at the end of January, or sorry, where we went from like 42 to 30, I think is what it was, Bitcoin in January of 2021. We had that major fourth wave correction before we went off to 64K or whatever in April of 2021. So anyways, I do, and again, that's the case I'm going to make. But know that I guess what I'm getting at is that has been my case for some time. And so I am slightly biased towards that. So take that with a grain of salt, as you will. So, all right. Anyways, on to this. If you look at the ETH chart, it's just double layered because we're going to use the purple one later for context in comparison purposes. But anyways, here's the RSI chart. We're on the weekly time frame, and you have seen a huge move clearly off of the bottom here on this weekly time frame. And so I think it is clear as day, our bottom is in, we're not going back down. And the question is, which part of the move has started? And so if we go back and look historically to this type of move, we could go back to essentially, here is the bottom that was put in back in July, August, September of 2019, at the end of the last cycle. And ironically, this move off the bottom is very similar, right? Like, I mean, look at this. I mean, you got up, down, and then your big spike, right? And what do we have down here? We got up, down, and a big spike. Like literally almost to a T the same. And so then you could say like, shoot, like, are we kind of in the equivalent of, well, as we peak here, February of 2020, as we get close to peaking here, and you could say, well, that wouldn't be good because we all know what happened here. Well, this was COVID. This was the COVID crash that took place right here. And yes, we did set a higher low, which we could do here, right? We could set a higher low. But I don't think that's where we're at. I think more likely where we were at in the cycle, even though these have extreme similarities. And I will say this, like, we are either here, what I'm showing you, so we're either kind of at the equivalent of February 2020, or we are here, which is January of 2021. And the case that I will make is that this double bottom, okay, we actually have one bottom here, and then we have a second double bottom here. And I will argue that we had our bottom here and our double bottom here. No, sorry, rewinding. That is, if you were to argue that your double bottom were to be, if that were to be your double bottom, then that would show confluence with the 2020 argument. So this is the 2020 argument. Everything I've lined out: double bottom, push bounce, right before rollover and crash. what I'm going to argue here, hold on a second, let me get rid of these, is that actually where we are at is more along the lines of this higher low. I know it sounds weird, that these double bottoms and that this here, this August 20th, this is, now again, we had a higher low here and we had a lower low here. But what I'm going to show you and what I believe this is rather than a bottom, is I'm going to look at this from the top standpoint. So we had two peaks, essentially. We had this peak and this peak. And I would argue that is this peak, and this is a much more subdued one here that we had in December. But we had two alt seasons. And we also had two mini alt seasons, kind of early alt seasons, if you remember, in the 2020s. Right before COVID, we started to get a ramp up. We got flushed out. And then we had a big August ramp up before a big flush out in 2020. And we had the same thing here. In February through, call it April of 2024. You guys will remember that. And then December, January of 24, 25 of this year was our second mini all season. So we had one here and one here. These are the two, call it mini seasons we had. And then we had a big flush and we had a big flush. And I would argue that is where we're at currently. And the irony between this peak and this peak, right? You're about February to August, so you had about 6 months here, and you had about, we'll call it from December to, I mean, yeah, call it March-ish. So what is that, 6, 9, probably about 10 months, so a little bit longer here than this one. But I think that's where I think we've had these two marks. We got our flush, we got our big flush. And so I would argue this is where we were at currently. And this, and now I'm going to get off the ETH BTC chart, but kind of remember this kind of overarching philosophy and time frame, because if you look here, we came off the bottom in late December and we peaked, end of January, give or take. And I think that is roughly the equivalent. Okay, so now we are going to get rid of, and again, since I'm walking through this with you guys, you're gonna have to mind my charting as we go stuff. So those are the two cases. So I just presented the two cases, the February 2020 case and the January 2021 case. Now, again, that's where I come in with bias because of some others, but that's where the ETH BTC chart is. So now let us go to the actual ETH chart. And we're going to leave the BTC on there. We're going to go back to the daily so that now you can see these are all the areas I marked off. Okay. These are all of the areas that I just talked about, and this should give you more confluence in my mind as to where I think we're at. So as I make my case, every single highlighted circle here is when ETH hit above 80 on the daily RSI, okay? So we've done it quite a few times over the years. This is from 2020 until now, so they call it the past 5 or 6 years. And now if we go back, right? So we talked about February 2020, and we also talked about January 2021. So these are the two big correlations that I think, are we here or are we here? If you remember, this is that August. And so this is where I'm going to make that correlation. So off of the bottom that we had of ETH BTC back here in 2019, we had two major ramp ups for Ethereum, okay? And ultimately the alt season here, one in February, two in August, and then we got our big push in January in 2021 when we finally broke out. And if you look at where I'm looking at it from, if we look at the last two peaks, November of 24. There's also some irony in this little pop right here too. So you got your initial pop, your second pop, you got like a little wannabe breakout here, and then final big breakout. And then if you go back to the two tops that we had here, right? So here's the ETH chart. This is kind of the bottom before we really broke out of here. We get our pop here in March of 24. We get it again in December. We fully flush reset. We get a little tease, okay? And then we get our breakout. And then we get our breakout. So again, you have the bottom of ETH, okay? You get a pop. First alt season, second alt season, fake tease, real move. First, second, tease, real move. And so this is further evidence as to why I think this is the most likely scenario that we are here. Okay. Now the question is, okay, so what happens? Let's assume that my base case is accurate. Let's assume we are in fact in January 2021 and we are not in February of 2020. And then let's look at, well, what happened, right? So now we're going to kind of zoom in, and this is where you're going to kind of have to bear with me a little bit. I've marked off here, as you can see, each of the times where we crossed this 80 threshold, we did have a correction almost every single time. So we're going to go back to that February 2020. Well, I don't need to do this one. You know, this was COVID, right? Like I was telling you, hopefully we're not in this February 2020. But again, this was our first alt season. I mean, we basically came from, call it 100 up to 300. So we did a 3x in ETH, right? And if I'm drawing the correlations here, I think that's roughly what we did here, right? We came from, let's see if we call here, we call it roughly 1,300 to 4,000. Well, there's your 3x, your 4x if you come off the bottom. But anyways, so this was a big one. Right, so this was 60%. So if we are in February 2020, well, then we have a 60% ahead of us. But I don't think that's the case, right? So then we get our, then we have our big flush, right? Equivalent to this. This is March through whatever it's called, March through September 2024 is roughly what I'm talking about, like from like an equivalent time frame, right? Cycle wise. All right, so then we get our second flush. Then we get our second peak here around the July to August time frame, right? This is what I'm calling the equivalent of our second alt season, which was basically December to January. That's this time frame right here. But let's take a look now that we are, because we peaked right up, we came above it once, we dipped down, we came up again. So again, I don't think we're here, but you had like a little bit of an 8% dip, and then you had a much larger, call it 22% dip, okay? So you had a 22, and ultimately here we had about a 20%, and then we still rallied more as we got major bearish divergence come in. We had a big flush before the big move. I'm going to make the argument again that we are past this, that this was December. I'm going to make the argument that this was December and January of 2025. All right, but at least you know that when we have this one, we had about a 20% correction. Okay, we had a 10 and then a 20. So is a 10 or a 20 on the table? Well, let's look at the next time we got to this. Now, this to me, right here in November 2020, this was the fake out that we just had. Excuse me. Here. This was this fake out in May of 25. We had a big run, fake out, flush it out before the real move. I think, where are we? Okay, so here we are, November 2020. We had a roughly 20% correction, okay? And just for context, how much did we get here if they are similar? And we go from here. We're not going to go from the top. We're going to go from the peak of the RSI which was here. And we had about an 18% correction, okay? From the peak of the RSI back to here, okay? So now we enter what I believe is the most similar to where we are. And I believe that is that we are entering this phase right here. So here is our fake out, okay? And this is our real move. Now, you want to know why I think this is partly a real move? I want to give me another, give you some more context to it. Well, we are also, or we were, hold on. We were, that's what we were doing during this time. We were breaking previous all-time highs during this exact time. And what are we doing? So here comes this RSI. Well, what do we do? And we kind of do this weird chop up and explode. So we do this kind of vertical accumulation after topping out on the RSI, and we vertically accumulate until we break through the previous all-time highs. And so I believe this is where we are. Now let's see what this is. 20, I can't see because I put my thing in the wrong spot. There we go. Now I can see where to draw my correction from. So here's the peak of the RSI. When we first broke, I mean, you could argue that this is the first time we broke it. And if you do that, we don't have a whole lot to go here, 10% maybe. But that we ultimately get all the way up to 1,300 before we flush 30%. But that ultimately, this is the big move. Now, by the way, if you guys don't remember, if I were to overlay real quickly here, BTC, well, what do we have here? If you guys remember. So during this thing, this is when we had, if you can kind of see the pink line here, this is when we had Bitcoin. We're over here, by the way, 40,000. Remember when Bitcoin got up to 40-ish thousand and puked all the way to 30? This was your wave 4. This was your wave 4 correction. Now, at the beginning of that wave 4 is when, if we take, all right, so here is the peak of Bitcoin, and then that's when ETH pukes. That's when ETH pukes from 13 and 1350 all the way down. It has a 30% correction down to 900 before it ultimately rips back to the upside. And this is the confluence that I think is happening. If you were to go over here, I think we are about to get this final rip up. So if we look at this right here, we're at the 20th of July right now. I think we get this push up to 130, maybe a little bit higher. 100. You could even get all the way up to 140, 145, depending upon this push. But I do believe this is the, now that this fourth subwave is getting close to complete, I believe we get the fifth of the third wave of the larger final fifth wave, which means basically this final move here is in line with, in my opinion, here's Bitcoin. Look at this little guy. See this little guy right here? See, look at this little guy right here. January 3rd. So this little pause out, okay, right here. And then you get that final move. I believe that this move right here is what we're about to get. And that then you're going to get a large fourth wave correction before the final fifth. Okay, that's my general belief of where we are in the market. And if you look at ETH and ETH BTC, I'll take Bitcoin off of here for a second, clean it up a little bit. That if that is the case, then we are going, and this is aligning, right? This is right here, okay? This is the move. So we broke out we are now above our 80 RSI, and we're going to get a little bit of a vertical accumulation, probably topping this out, maybe excessively, maybe even more than I originally thought. Now you might get, right, because if you remember, we still got, let's see, from whether you go from here to here, you got about a 10% correction. Or if you go from here to here, you got about a 15% correction. So you got about a 15% correction, I think. But I think ultimately, I think we vertically accumulate as BTC breaks out. I think that's what we're going to see. And I think you're going to see something similar to this. Continue to get really overheated. You'll get some 10% corrections, but when it rips, it's going to rip. And ultimately, I think we are going to, then we're probably gonna get a big dump on ETH and everything as Bitcoin goes into its fourth wave. But then you get, but it's moderate. When I say moderate, I mean, this is a 30% correction. And if we got a 30% correction here, what would that take us to? Well, that's 30% correction. Let me go back here. Sorry, I'm probably making you guys sick with all this stuff. But remember, that was a 30% correction below all-time high. So basically, so what I see happening is, do we vertically climb until we get within, call it a few percentage points of 4,800, puke, and then vertically accumulate to break through 4,800? That's kind of what I see and how I see it playing out. In other words, I think you can get 10%, a 10% move. Which would be about, call it 300, 350 points. So 3,400, I think, is probably the lowest you see this go. I think you probably get something like this. I think you probably get, maybe something like that. And then ultimately, I think you get up to here, you get some vertical accumulation. And then you probably get a puke along with Bitcoin once it gets to that 130 to 140 range. Everyone thinks the top is in. Everyone thinks it's all over because we had a little bit of euphoria. We had really overblown metrics. And this is what I think, look, this is my one push versus two push scenario that I've talked a lot about. Do we get one push, which is the 130 to 140 final move for Bitcoin, along with the final move for altcoins? Or do we have two pushes? In other words, we get that, plus we get this flush, and then we get a big V reversal for the final blow off. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And the question is this it? Or is there another big one? I think the true test of like whether this is it, whether this is one push or two push, will be how does ETH handle compared to Bitcoin, and I'll show you that in a second. But I do want to finish up these. What are the corrections on these? So let's go. Let's continue to move down the line. For any time we have these markers, well, we know what this one is. I mean, again, we crossed the major threshold here. This was our top. So we had another 20% push, and then we completely puked. Again, this was May of 2021. We all know what happened there. We did this vertical accumulation thing again here on this bar, right? Where we didn't really get much more than like a 10% correction. So we get about an 8%. So it's fairly common to get like some vertical accumulation while we get some cooling off on the metrics. So, and if we do that, we kind of cap out about a 10% correction. So I think 10%, that would be my guess, right? Which is roughly 3,400. 8%, 10%, call it somewhere in that 34 to 35 range. But ultimately, it's short, it's quick. I mean, these are daily candles. So, over a couple of days. And then you just vertically accumulate and keep coming up. That would be my guess, that we go into this. Again, this is my guess, is that we go into this vertical accumulation as we get the final, the first of potentially two pushes for Bitcoin. And that the big flush comes after Bitcoin makes its move. fast forward, where is the next? So we didn't get another, if we go here, right, we got about a 6% correction. I mean, ultimately we did a bigger one. But again, you don't necessarily get like huge 20% corrections just because it goes into this. There's another one. Just because they go into this overheated RSI, here you get another 10%. So most of the time, you get these 8 to 10% corrections, cooling off metrics with some vertical accumulation, building before the big move. Again, here, you really got another 20% before a big flush. And this is obviously what happened in March to October. But I guess my point being is like the initial moves are only about a 10% move. So I really would expect like a 10% move, 3,400 at worst, vertically accumulate under the all-time high of 4,800. You get up, if we were to replicate 2021 identically, you then flush out, everyone freaks out that we couldn't even break all-time highs because Bitcoin pukes to 110, 112, 114 for its retest on the larger fourth wave, only to give one big final FU rip. Here is another. This one's a little bigger of a correction. This is, no, it's not. It's 10%. So, I mean, it's 10% every time. And a lot of times it goes 10% down and then continues to go up. And here again, overheated. We actually went up a little bit, but if you go from the overheated RSI, 12%. Again, you ultimately peaked a little bit lower here. But yeah, I mean, that's my base, right? That's my base. Now, the question of one push, two push, right? Let's get into that. So let's get rid of ETH BTC for a second. And let's throw up Bitcoin. And we go back to, how do we know if it's one push or two push? Let me show you major corrections in Bitcoin. What I would argue is when you get these moves, Bitcoin, so if it is I mean, 30K was really, it wasn't anything. It was still a higher low. So my point being is Bitcoin on this move, which was its fourth move, okay? This was the third wave, fourth wave, and then your final blow off fifth into a Wyckoff. That when it put in that low, let's get rid of that. I want to do this. That when it put in this low, horrible, that it was still a higher low, right? I mean, you would have had to have broken like this structure, right? For it to maybe even here, for it to even potentially resemble a break of structure. So Bitcoin was still in a bullish momentum, okay? Well, you're in a same thing, higher low, vertical accumulation, higher low, vertical accumulation for alts and ETH and Bitcoin. So all were still bullishly structured, okay? So if we get this, if we get bullish, 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 then it's likely that this move is the first of two pushes. However, when you see this next big correction, okay, again, so we get another big correction from Bitcoin, still put in a higher low. Another correction, higher low. Same thing, higher low, higher low. These are putting in higher lows every time, okay? So you have your low here, then here, then here. On the alts, you have here and here and here. So everything is still higher low structurally, okay? Then Bitcoin puts in a lower low. And alts and Bitcoin or Alt and ETH still put in a higher low. So these put in a higher low while Bitcoin puts in a lower low. This is the canary in the coal mine. That move, when Bitcoin goes lower low, these still go higher low. That is, it's almost over. And so if we fast forward to this, right? Here's your Bitcoin. It is a higher low. Okay. So long. This actually was a bad drawing now that I'm looking at it from it would need to be. Oh, wait, no, I'm looking at ETH. Whoops. So Bitcoin, so that is fine. So Bitcoin, right, should look something like this. You go up, right? Final push, and then when it comes down, it should base here and go up. If, for whatever reason, it decides to do something like this and break structure, then you're likely going to have a lower low here, and this was the final move for alts. So anyways, to wrap up my general thesis is I believe that we're going to get some. So if you go back and you look at every time these things hit, the average move is only about a 10% move. So if we get a 10% move, that puts us at 34. But ultimately, I think we're in a vertical accumulation phase as Bitcoin is about ready to break into its final move. The alternative being there are several peaks of the market, right? This one, and then February 2020, your March and December, where we had larger moves, but you had upside first. So that's, I think ultimately you got a 10% move here in the short term. And then I believe how we see things play out after that is going to be dependent upon Bitcoin. I think you get a little bit of a correction. Then if you get Bitcoin's breakout, they move together. You get some vertical accumulation. ETH gets to close to 4,800. That's where Bitcoin tops out. You then get your large flush. That's my general thought currently. It was long, but I wanted to walk you guys through my brain and how I'm looking at things. So that's it. I will see you guys in Discord.